Hey guys, it's your average middle-aged American back again with another reaction video. This one is Europe's experiment, treating trains like planes. So hopefully this video, I haven't seen it yet, but I get the feeling that it's going to kind of explain the idea, the concept, the footprint of European trains. You know, in America, we don't have very many trains, especially not high-speed trains or modern trains. You know, we have the Amtrak trains, which have been around for at least 100 years probably, and it's really not the same experience, although they can be nice. I haven't been on an Amtrak train since I was in 8th grade, so, but they do exist, but it's nothing like Europe. I know that they're working on some high-speed stuff in Florida and Las Vegas and California, so we'll see what happens. But I'm interested to see what the idea here is. And I believe it's based on the fact that most European countries are not large geographically. So if you have a way of interconnecting these countries, you know, without flying everywhere, by the time you go through customs and get on the plane and you know, the plane takes off, then the plane lands, and you got to go through security and blah, 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 blah. You're spending 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours on a plane trip that took an hour. So I get it. I'm hoping that's what they're going to explain. And who knows? Maybe some Americans will see this and change the way we operate. So let's check it out. If you're new to my channel, it's anything and everything that interests me as an average middle-aged American, mostly focused on learning about other countries and other cultures, especially Europe. Wife and I plan to do some traveling to Europe, going into retirement, and just trying to learn as much as we can. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that button. Doesn't cost you anything. Think you'll like the channel. We just hit 1,170 something subscribers, which is fantastic. Channel started 8 months ago. We have over 100 videos now, and it's a great little community. I learn a lot. I answer questions about America. I defend America sometimes too much, but hey, I'm human. Anyway, it's a great place to learn about other countries from people that live there. Almost all of my subscribers are actually European, not American. So we learn quite a bit, and it's authentic, and everything from food to travel tips to politics. We talk about it, we keep it civil, and we learn from each other. All right, enough jibber jabber. Let's see what this video is about.
When the world thinks of Europe, they think of the trains. No continent's countries have so collectively chosen to develop such dense and efficient networks of passenger railways. One can step on a train above the Arctic Circle in Narvik, Norway, travel exclusively on the rails, and end up all the way at the continent's border with Asia in Istanbul. But it's not going to be efficient. That's because, while possible, this routing touches on the network's fatal flaw. France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and others have each developed some of the world's most efficient and effective rail networks, but they're just not well connected. Take Milan, for example, Europe's 8th largest metro area. While a world-leading network exists south to the rest of Italy and north into nearby Switzerland, just 3 trains go farther. A fairly frequent service to Paris, a once-daily trip to Frankfurt, and an overnight train to Munich and Vienna. This isn't an isolated edge case. Paris and Madrid are the European Union's 2 largest metro areas, and yet they have 0 direct trains running between them. In fact, the farthest one can travel from France's borders on a direct high-speed train from Paris is London, Amsterdam, Munich, or Milan. And not only is there a dearth of direct trains, but connections are hardly straightforward. A Herculean effort went into digging a tunnel from France to the UK to connect the 2 countries' rail networks, and yet in practice, they connect London to the continent, not England, and certainly not the UK. Technical constraints currently prevent practical cross-border passenger service beyond London or by anyone but Eurostar, but the Eurostar service does little to integrate with the UK's existing domestic network. To travel from Paris to Manchester, for example, one must individually book the Eurostar from Paris to London, then upon arrival, walk 20 minutes from St. Pancras to Euston Station to take another train, which also must be booked individually up to Manchester. The fact that this itinerary cannot be booked as a single ticket both means people are less likely to identify it as a possibility, and
You know, from an outsider looking in, It seems like you might be getting a little picky. I mean, you're talking about other countries, not other cities. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm just used to things being a little bit harder than getting on a train in Paris and going to Manchester. But who knows? And it sounds like these are things that could probably be addressed. Maybe take the 20 most common long-term routes, and just make some kind of a little, a patch between the default areas. In other words, I think these are things that can be fixed without changing the entire infrastructure. The fact that you can still do it should be a positive thing. The fact that you can get on a train in Paris and go just about anywhere in Europe, even if you have to get off and get on a different train or whatever. That all can be solved with shuttles, with, slower dedicated trains, whatever. Just my opinion. I don't know much about the train system, but there's plenty of places in America, with all the resources we have and as big as our country is, there's not direct flights from every city to every other city. There's all kinds of times that you got to get off a plane and get on a different plane, or one airport could be half the price of another airport. All those things exist. So things can be changed. Things can be fixed, ironed out.
And that if the first train is delayed enough that the second is missed, there's no obligation for the operator to rebook the traveler onto the next one. So, while only 4 hours of train travel stand between France's largest and the UK's second largest city, a competitive number versus air travel, these inefficiencies functionally increase it to an untenable level. The competitor, planes, also significantly undercut trains on fares. Unlike airlines, who price connecting itineraries lower than direct to compensate for the inconvenience, the fact that the two segments of this trip must be booked separately and are therefore priced separately makes this functionally impossible, even if it would be a winning strategy. One would be lucky to find a combination of train fares totaling $150 between Paris and Manchester, while airfares on this route typically sit below $100. This phenomenon is consistent continent-wide. Average train fares between Paris and Barcelona typically sit 3 times higher than airfares. From Amsterdam to London, it's 4 times higher. Cases like Milan to Frankfurt do exist, where trains only cost marginally more, but that's not the average. In Europe, crossing borders by rail is more expensive and less convenient. This is no coincidence. The better part of a century ago, as Europe rebuilt and reconnected in the wake of World War II, countries across the continent searched for opportunities to revitalize their war-torn economies. A number of them, especially warm southern nations like Spain and Italy, identified the potential of tourism. This conveniently coincided with the opening of the jet age, in which new aircraft development and economies of scale made air travel faster and more affordable. Package holiday providers took advantage of this to offer increasingly inexpensive trips to increasingly far-flung destinations, and some even went further to set up airlines entirely dedicated to flying vacationers like Condor and Britannia Airways. As travel abroad became affordable, cooler coastal towns closer to home, like England's Margate, Torquay, and Blackpool, started a slow slide into ruin. But simultaneously, to the south, tourist numbers exploded as sunny seaside towns quickly developed into destinations. The oil crisis in the 70s stunted this growth, but it soon accelerated again in the 90s as the business model pioneered by Condor, Britannia, and others was refined and innovated upon. The budget airline was formed. Ryanair, EasyJet, and others not only offered lower fares by themselves, they also added market pressure that pushed down airfares industry-wide. Flying was now an approachable luxury, and destinations previously too far for a practical vacation became the most intuitive options. Decades on, budget airlines have thoroughly taken over travel across Europe. They grew out of connecting the north of Europe to its south, but today go east, west, and everywhere in between. Meanwhile, however, trains. The same oil crisis that stunted the growth of international vacationing in the 70s accelerated the development of high-speed rail. Facing a similar resource scarcity decades before, Japan captured the world's attention by opening the first electric high-speed rail service between Tokyo and Osaka, the Shinkansen. Embarrassed by being beaten to the punch, Major economies globally started developing their own plans for electric high-speed rail. While the US, UK, Italy, and others made marginal progress in speeding up their trains, the first to properly match the Shinkansen's speeds was France. On September 22, 1981, France's Ligne à grande vitesse Sud-Est opened for passenger service. What was a 3-hour and 40-minute trip between Paris and Lyon the day before now took just 2 hours and 40 minutes. The engineering effort behind these smooth, gentle tracks was colossal. The construction cost some $18.7 million per mile, or $11.6 million per kilometer. But as the country's first and third largest cities, a first line between Paris and Lyon made sense, especially since it also reduced travel time to Marseille, the second largest. France continued developing this network in this intuitive manner, opening LGV Atlantique in 1989 to speed up travel to Rennes, Nantes, and Bordeaux, then extending the line past Lyon to speed up trips to Marseille. The nation's most ambitious connection occurred next, with the opening of LGV Nord, which linked Paris to Calais, the start of the brand new Channel Tunnel to Britain. Come 1994, just 13 years after the continent's first high-speed train rolled out of the station, it was now possible to take a 2-hour trip under the ocean between two of the world's.
Now, it looks to me like most of the trains in Europe, if not all of the trains in Europe, at least the ones that I've seen, are all kind of standard, 2-rail normal tracks that have been around forever. Now, I assume that they're, newer and better and, tougher and more efficient and all of that. But the Asian trains, the Japanese trains are more, they're doing more like magnetic, like almost like a hovering type thing. Like, I think they call it magnetic levitation. Is anyone in Europe using those kind of trains? Where they're not actually, I guess they're not even maybe touching the track? Or anybody using them like a monorail? Like Disney, Disney World, Disneyland, whatever. They've had monorails for 50 years, where it's it just has one rail right in the middle. So let me know if there's differences. If you guys have anything else other than a normal train track, then I would assume that would be a problem if they, one track intersects another track. But I was just curious if they had any dedicated, lines. Let me know.
Most economically important cities, Paris and London. This was momentous, but unfortunately still is momentous. This is still the most notable example of two European countries collaborating to connect to each other by high-speed rail. It's an exception to the norm. You see, France's high-speed network developed from the inside out. In order to justify the enormous upfront cost of these rail projects, the politicians behind them focused on connecting the greatest number of French people to the greatest number of other French people, not Germans, Italians, or Spaniards. Germany did the same, as did Italy, Spain, and essentially every nation with high-speed rail in Europe. This phenomena is paralleled with the trains themselves. With slower travel speeds and fewer constituents to appease, international destinations have always been an afterthought to the state-owned operators that dominate the European railway industry. Trains primarily serve as domestic transport in Europe. Planes dominate the international industry. Perhaps beyond the maps and metrics, the case studies and figures, the best evidence of the limitations of cross-border European rail travel is the fact that for decades, the EU itself has been working to fix it. Cutting against the grain of history since the 1990s, the EU has authored reports, drafted directives, and passed regulations seeking to address the two fundamental shortcomings of European rails.
So it seems to me all you need, and this is just so simple, I should just do it myself, maybe I'll start a company. All you need is like an artery, like a main vein that goes just from the center of one, like from Paris, to this, from the center of this train network to the center of another train network to a center of another train network. You don't need to connect to all the little cities. You just need to connect to the main starting point. Just like everything started in Paris, I assume everything else started in London, for England. So you just need something that connects those main arteries, and then you can use the existing rails for everything else. right? Seems simple.
A lack of competition, and a lack of cohesion. Identifying the fact that only a measly 6% of travelers went by rail in 2001, the EU bemoaned how a lack of modernization in management and infrastructure had resulted in more road congestion, more bottlenecks, and more car crashes. A series of partially effective laws followed. Citing the fact that intra-EU rail travel remained at 6% in 2013, the EU again recognized that rail had effectively stagnated on account of a lack of competition and standardization, and decided something more needed to be done. In 2016, the EU passed a series of directives and regulations collectively called the Fourth European Rail Package. It was the most comprehensive rail legislation to date. The fourth package is broken into two pillars, the technical and the market. On the technical side, the process of disbanding nation-run monopolies took a major step forward with the addition of more stringent monitoring and the announcement that public service contracts would become subject to competitive tendering beginning in 2023. The technical side, on the other hand, sought to simplify by expanding the European Union Agency for Railways into a one-stop shop for all vehicle registrations, litigation issues, and safety certification. Together, the bundle of legislation aimed to increase competition and cut away some of the red tape holding back international rail routes. While it was the fourth attempt, the package, along with the three prior, has effectively cracked the market wide open. Theoretically, any operator, public or private, can now operate passenger trains anywhere within the European Union. For the first time in a long time, European rail strategy is undergoing fundamental change. To date, as the EU hoped, the most profound impact of the fourth package and its predecessors is in the increased competition between the old powerful incumbents, Deutsche Bahn, SNCF, Trenitalia, Renfe, and a new wave of scrappy startups and international subsidiaries. In 2012, a fleet of stylish, brand new high-speed trains appeared on recently liberalized Italian rails connecting Naples to Milan. The open-access private rail company, Italo, backed by a $1 billion investment, had purchased 25 French Alstom AGV train sets and started direct competition along the country's busiest, most densely populated, long-distance route. Offering slightly lower ticket prices, onboard Wi-Fi, and streamlined, largely automated booking, the private operator took the incumbent Trenitalia head-on, and the company took off. Leasing access to the corridor and outsourcing maintenance and food service to minimize overhead, the service proved viable, and in the years that followed, Italo expanded nationwide, turning its first profit in 2015. Yet, rather than siphoning away customers from Trenitalia, Italo's new service across a critical domestic route unearthed a previously hidden demand. From 2011 to 2018, while Trenitalia went from commanding all Italian high-speed traffic to only 3/4, the revenue pool had grown to such an extent that the company actually gained business. With competition upping offerings and lowering prices.
That's interesting. They lost market share, but they gained profit. That's wild. Plus, competition makes you better. You know, it makes you better. You don't rest on your laurels. You have to compete. So when you compete, you start finding things that you took for granted, fixing them. I mean, that's the entire basis of capitalism. That's what America screams about every day. The market dictates. Just an average middle-aged American.
More Italians were taking the high-speed trains than ever before. The loser wasn't Trenitalia, but rather the airlines, as the Rome to Milan air passenger numbers halved and Ryanair gave up the route entirely. Now, the Italo situation was unique in that it took on the incumbent provider directly, offering a nearly identical route with nearly identical service on nearly identical trains. In a 2016 study of competitive open-access rail providers previously and currently operating, of the 34 such companies in Europe, only Italo was high-speed, while 12 offered low-cost, low-quality services, and another 11 offered niche services like night trains and weekend routings. In other words, 23 of 34 companies sought to minimize direct competition while offering something different than the incumbent. Flixtrain, for example, entered the German rail scene in 2018 when it took over the Hamburg-Cologne Express line without ever actually buying a single train. Rather than put up major money to challenge Deutsche Bahn's high-speed trains directly, Flixtrain instead opted to run older, renovated trains leased from Railpool and operated by the German company IGE to offer an alternative and far cheaper service. So far, it has worked. The success of Flixtrain's daily service from Hamburg to Cologne, a route far cheaper and only slightly slower than Deutsche Bahn's high-speed option, has emboldened the company to expand across Germany, open a line in Sweden, and even offer its first international connection to Switzerland. Flixtrain might be unique in the fact that it owns no rolling stock, but its budget business model is far from uncommon for the early days of what may well be an open access revolution. The closest precedent to what's happening now in the European railways industry is the deregulation of the American and European aviation markets from the 1970s onward. It was exactly that opened the door for Ryanair, EasyJet, Southwest, and others to grow into some of the world's largest and most influential airlines. No longer did airlines have to charge the fares, fly the routes, and offer the service that the government dictated. Capitalizing on this precedent, SNCF, France's national rail operator, knew exactly what to do back in 2013 in anticipation of the continent's coming liberalization. Ouigo was founded with the intention to adapt the low-cost airline business model to the rails. Tickets could only be bought online, rather at labor-intensive ticket counters. Upcharges were abundant, with luggage and even the use of electric outlets costing extra. Legroom.
How do you guys travel? Do you use budget airlines? I don't travel enough to justify it. To me, traveling is a very stressful thing. You know, I'm not exactly a small person to start with, so I have to think about things like my comfort, and just looking at that crowd of people just gives me the heebie-jeebies. So I don't do budget airlines, and I don't ever get on a train. So, to me, if I'm going to make the effort of traveling, I have to travel well. I don't travel first class necessarily, but when I used to go to conventions, my partner and I, who is also not a small person, we would just buy the seat between us. So there's 3 seats in a row on most airplanes in America, and we would just buy the middle seat. So we had, 3 seats between the 2 of us, and it was great. Put the armrest up, and it was almost like first class without paying first class. And I mean, I've been upgraded to first class and that kind of thing, but just little things like that, an extra $300 or $400 between 2 trips. We used to go, or the plane would be 4 or 5 hours to go to a convention. So, you're talking about 8 hours worth of comfort between 2 people for $400 extra. That's $200 each way. That's $50 an hour. It's $25 an hour a piece to make sure that we're 100% comfortable. And then you look around and the entire plane is full, stuffed, because they're all going to a convention. Millions of people, over 1 million people would go, to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, that kind of thing. It was well worth it. But how do you guys do it? Do you just buy the cheapest seat? Is it worth paying more for you? Do you find that the ambiance, the comfort, and all that is worth the upcharge? Let me know. Even in budget stuff, if that's your choice, I mean, it all comes down to the money. But I would do the same thing on a train. Buy the seat next to you or whatever, so you just don't have to worry about it. Especially if you think it's going to be crowded. And it might still be cheaper than buying a nicer seat somewhere else or whatever. Just curious.
The room was tighter, staffing was more limited, and daily train utilization was higher. All around, the experience was worse, but like its airborne equivalent, this was a compromise people were willing to make in exchange for its rock-bottom prices. While its full-service equivalent offers the 90-minute trip between Rennes and Paris for no less than $36, Ouigo sells the same route for as little as $16. While SNCF always had the ability to undercut itself within France, Ouigo was founded with an eye towards the future we're now living through. It was a test, and seemingly a successful one, but the ultimate ambitions of Ouigo laid well beyond its home country. In 2020, when Spain opened up its lines for closely monitored competition, Ouigo España was ready, and in 2021, France's national rail operator started its first route entirely within Spain. Barcelona to Madrid. In quick succession, and in direct response to the success of Ouigo in France, Spain's national operator Renfe founded Avlo to also offer low-cost service between the two cities, and a third competitor, Iryo, is also expected to commence operations on the route later in 2022. Including the incumbent full-service high-speed train operated by Renfe, that means this route will see 4 different services competing head-to-head between the same cities. Barcelona to Madrid is becoming the world's most competitive rail route. A certain extent of this cost-differentiated head-to-head competition seemingly can work, based on the experience of Italo in Italy and based on the experience of budget airlines. For example, on the London to Barcelona air route, British Airways and Iberia passenger numbers stayed relatively consistent throughout the early 2000s, while nearly all of the growth can be attributed to EasyJet and Ryanair entering the market. The budget operators didn't only capture demand, they created it.
Right.
Ouigo has observed something similar. Of passengers surveyed shortly after launch, 50% indicated they would have otherwise taken the full-service alternative, but crucially, 25% say they would have taken the car, bus, or plane, and another 25% say they would have not traveled at all. Given the parallels in this phenomena, that means low-cost rail...
It's really a win-win. I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. Full service or, standard, traditional, whatever. They can keep doing their thing without dropping their prices too much. Maybe they even increase their prices a little bit and increase their quality, increase their comfort, and kind of form that niche without losing any money, while more people are being introduced to the idea of traveling, via low-cost train or low-cost plane. I mean, it's a win-win. No one's going down and everybody's going up. It's awesome.
Rail operators don't need to work within the context of current demand. They don't need to compete head-to-head on the continent's busiest routes like Barcelona to Madrid, Paris to Lyon, or Milan to Rome. Because they're creating rail demand, they can create routes that previously could not have profitably operated given lower passenger numbers. This was how budget airlines took over the world. Not through direct competition, but through induced demand. So, continuing the parallels with budget airlines, what we'll likely see going forward is route innovation, especially focused on appealing to leisure travelers. The French Riviera is an extremely popular vacation spot, but the stretch from Caen to the Italian border currently only sees long-distance service on major routes to major French cities. However, a private low-cost rail operator could take a page out of Allegiant Airlines' playbook, for example. They're a US airline focused on connecting small towns to popular vacation spots like Las Vegas and Florida through low-cost flights a few times a week. This is centered on the principle that vacationers will schedule their trips around convenient transport, unlike business travelers, to keep to their strict schedule. And the fact that Allegiant has one of the world's highest airline profit margins proves this principle true. Similarly, one could imagine a...
Yeah, I mean, there's Allegiant flights that can take you halfway across the United States, which, the United States is almost the same size as Europe. And it can take you halfway across the United States for like $39, $49, one way. I mean, it's if you happen to be in a situation where the airports, that you need to go to, what it's ideal for is if you have another house in another state, or if you have, say your parents live in another state, and you're flying back and forth all the time without a bunch of luggage, it's cheaper than driving your car. Forget about the time. It's literally cheaper than driving a car, paying for gas. And United States gas is probably the cheapest in the world, or close to it. Maybe it's cheaper in the Middle East, but we have the ability to supply as much oil as we want to use. And so, right now gas is $3 a gallon where I live, but it's still cheaper to get on an airplane. If you're taking one of these Allegiant flights, or there's a bunch of different ones, but Allegiant's been pretty good. Just imagine flying halfway across the United States for $40. Crazy.
private low-cost operator running a twice-weekly train starting in the early morning from Quimper in Brittany, stopping at small towns like Lorient, Vannes, and Redon on its way to Rennes, and speeding down on the high-speed lines to Marseille before dropping passengers off at all the small coastal towns up until the Italian border. Vacationers would plan around this convenient transport, and the business model could prove similarly profitable. But given the weakness of cross-border rail travel in Europe currently, the biggest opportunity for new innovative private rail operators in Europe likely centers on long-distance international connections. One could imagine, for example, a vast network of direct trains from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany to popular vacation spots to the south like Barcelona, Florence, and Rome. Of course, the barrier to this is travel time, especially relative to rail's airborne competitor. Passengers do tolerate longer travel times in exchange for the convenience and comfort of trains,
Right.
but only to an extent. There's still the infrastructure problem. With track development always having been intertwined with rail service development, which itself has been focused on domestic service, those cross-border gaps in high-speed rail still exist. Getting to Barcelona, Florence, and Rome requires dealing with the inefficiency of the tracks between them and the north. This is where the liberalization of the rails deviates from the liberalization of the skies. Planes only need airports, which exist effectively everywhere. Trains need tracks, which require a level of upfront investment far above what most private companies tolerate. Operators can only induce demand where governments have decided to build tracks. So, in order to fulfill their goal of usurping the aviation industry and unlocking the full potential of the next era of rail development, Europe has to find a way to view infrastructure from the continental scale rather than a national one. It has to invest in connectivity. But that next era has already started. Relative to the aviation industry, Europe's rail industry is roughly here, somewhere between 1980 and 2000, as deregulation took full force. And of course, what happened next was this: the fastest 20 years of growth and innovation the industry has ever seen. This revolution is already starting on the rails. What's left to decide now by governments and innovators is just how precedent-setting the next 20 years of European train travel are going to be.
Well, there you go, guys. Makes perfect sense to me. You know, it's a win-win. The more trains, you know, instead of splitting the existing pie, they're making the pie bigger, which is awesome because it doesn't help for a new train line to come in and an old train line to go out of business. So by adding these trains, I mean, hopefully they can do some negotiating between countries where they can, you know, to me, it'd be easier just to go from major city to major city and then use that major city's existing network, you know, go from, you know, Paris to London and, you know, London to Barcelona, whatever. But what do I know, you know? It's been a long time since I started a train company. All right, well, there you go, guys. I appreciate all of you. There'll be some other videos coming up you might want to check out. I've got some other high-speed train videos already on Spain, Switzerland, and Germany, and then also one in Austria. So if you're into trains, check those out. If you've got better videos that I should check out, please put them in the comments section. And as always, I appreciate all of you guys, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Thanks for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Can you believe that we now have over 1,000 subscribers and over 100 videos in our YouTube library? Me neither. It's been less than a year, and this channel has grown so rapidly. What's more important than the number of subscribers is the quality of subscribers. Our subscribers are knowledgeable and generous with their time. They teach us about their country and their culture from their firsthand experiences. See, over 95% of my subscribers live outside of the United States. So we're getting information firsthand. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that button. I think you'll enjoy it and it doesn't cost you anything. If you'd like to see other videos similar to this one on the same country, click here. If you'd like to see some videos on some other countries in Europe, click there. Want to see some of the most beautiful castles and cathedrals in the world? They're over here. Want to check out the United States? We're down here. I appreciate you, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.